For as long as humanity has looked to the horizon, the ocean has been less of a resource and more of a blue-black graveyard. To the ancients, the sea wasn't just water, it was the abyss, a chaotic, unformed void where the laws of the sunlit world simply ceased to exist. Imagine the year 1752. Off the coast of Norway, Bishop Erik Pontoppidan peers over the side of a vessel. He isn't looking for fish, he is documenting the accounts of sailors who speak of the Kraken. They describe an island that breathes, a mass of flesh and suckers so vast that when it sinks, it creates a maelstrom capable of pulling a man-of-war ship into the crushing depths. This wasn't just a tall tale to these men, it was a navigational hazard. They lived in a world where the line between natural history and myth was blurred by the sheer scale of the unknown. But the Kraken is a newcomer compared to the Leviathan. To find the true origin of maritime terror, we go back to the Levant. In the ancient texts of the Near East, the sea was personified by Tiamat, or Lotan, a multi-headed serpent representing primordial chaos. When the Hebrews spoke of the Leviathan, they weren't describing a whale. They were describing a creature of burning eyes and scales like rows of shields, a beast so fierce that only the divine could tame it. It represented the ultimate fear of the ancient world, that the order we build on land is fragile, and the chaos of the deep is always waiting to reclaim it. The terror of the primordial abyss isn't just about size, it's about the environment. At 4,000 meters down, the pressure is enough to crumble steel, and the light of the sun has never touched the sand. Sailors in the age of sail knew that if they went overboard, they weren't just drowning. They were entering a kingdom where they were no longer the apex predator. They were intruders in a world of bioluminescent nightmares and crushing silence. Even today, with our sonar and satellites, 80% of the ocean remains unmapped. We like to think we've conquered the Kraken, rebranding it as Architeuthis, the giant squid. But when the waves turn gray and the wind begins to howl, that ancient lizard-brain fear returns. We realize that the abyss isn't just a place on a map. It is the enduring mystery of what lurks beneath the surface, watching us in the dark. To understand the Wendigo, you have to understand the silence of a North American winter in the 17th century. It is a silence so heavy it rings in your ears. When the snow piles higher than the door frames and the salt pork runs out, the mind begins to do something terrifying. It begins to calculate the caloric value of one's companions. This is the birthplace of the hunger of the North. In the folklore of the Algonquian-speaking peoples, the Cree, the Ojibwe, and the Innu, the Wendigo is not just a monster, it is a warning. It is described as a gaunt giant, 15 feet tall, with skin pulled so tight over its bones that it looks like a skeleton wrapped in gray ash. Its eyes are pushed deep into their sockets, glowing with a pale, murderous light. Its most defining feature, however, is its lips, or lack thereof. They are tattered and bloody because the creature, in its eternal, agonizing hunger, has chewed them away. But the most terrifying, real element of this myth is the Wendigo psychosis. History records chilling accounts of traders and settlers who succumbed to this madness. Take the case of Swift Runner, a Cree trapper in 1878. During a particularly brutal winter in Alberta, surrounded by game he could have hunted, a darkness took over his mind. He claimed he was possessed by the spirit of the Wendigo. When the authorities finally reached his cabin, they found the remains of his wife and 6 children. He hadn't just killed them, he had consumed them. To the indigenous peoples, the Wendigo represented the ultimate taboo, cannibalism. But more than that, it was a metaphor for greed. The legend says that every time a Wendigo eats, it grows in proportion to what it has consumed, so it is never, ever full. It is a monster of more. It is the personification of a hunger that can never be satisfied, a void that grows larger the more you try to fill it. As the wind howls through the leafless trees of the boreal forest, the legend tells us that the sound isn't the wind at all. It's the Wendigo calling your name. It mimics the voices of loved ones to lure you away from the safety of the campfire and into the shadows. Because in the north, the greatest threat isn't the cold or the wolves. It's the realization that under the right conditions, the person standing next to you might stop seeing you as a friend and start seeing you as a meal.
In the modern world, we look at Greek statues and see beauty, order, and the birth of philosophy. But to the ancient Greeks, that thin veneer of civilization was constantly being clawed at by things that defied the very laws of nature. If the Wendigo is a monster of the spirit, the Hellenic nightmares are monsters of the flesh, biological impossibilities that shouldn't exist, yet do. At the center of this storm stands Typhon. He is not merely a beast, he is the father of all monsters. Ancient texts describe him as a colossal being whose head brushed the stars. From his thighs down, he was a mass of coiled vipers. Instead of fingers, he had 100 dragon heads sprouting from his hands, each screaming in a different, terrifying tongue. The roar of a lion, the bellow of a bull, and the hiss of 1,000 snakes. The story of Typhon isn't just a fairy tale. It was the ancient world's way of explaining the literal shaking of the earth. When Mount Etna erupted, the Greeks didn't see tectonic plates, they saw the literal struggle of a trapped god. They felt the heat of his fire-breathing breath in the volcanic vents. Typhon represents the raw, chaotic power of the earth itself, a power that even Zeus, the king of the gods, barely managed to defeat. It is the fear of a world that can turn into a living nightmare at any moment, where the very ground beneath your feet is a sleeping titan. But Greek terror also lived on a human scale. Enter the Gorgons. We all know Medusa, but we often forget the visceral horror she represented. She wasn't just a woman with snake hair, she was a liminal being, something caught between the human and the monstrous. In the 5th century BC, the image of the Gorgoneon, the severed head of Medusa, was used on shields and doorways. It wasn't just decoration, it was apotropaic magic. It was meant to turn away evil by being more terrifying than the evil itself. The horror of the Gorgon is the horror of the gaze. In a culture that prized sight and observation, the idea of a monster that kills you simply by being looked at is the ultimate sensory nightmare. It suggests that there are things in this world so foul, so fundamentally wrong, that the human mind literally turns to stone, paralyzed and shattered upon witnessing them. These myths reflect a real-world anxiety of the Bronze and Iron Ages, the fear that no matter how many temples we build or laws we write, there are forces, typhonic chaos, and gorgonic madness that can never be fully tamed. They are the shadows cast by the light of Mount Olympus.
There is a universal human fear that death is not an end, but a transformation into something cold, resentful, and hungry. Across the globe, cultures have developed early warning systems for the grave. In the mist-soaked hills of Ireland, that system is the banshee. The name comes from the Old Irish Bain Seed, meaning woman of the fairy mound. She is rarely a monster in the physical sense. She appears as a woman with long, streaming hair, her eyes permanently rimmed red from centuries of weeping. But it is her voice that carries the true terror. The keening of a banshee is a sound that occupies the space between a sob and a scream. Historically, families in Ireland, specifically those with names starting with O or Mac, believed the banshee was a guardian of their bloodline, but to hear her was a death sentence. There are chilling real-world accounts from the 17th and 18th centuries of entire households falling into a panicked silence because a wailing was heard outside a window where no woman stood. It is the personification of the inevitable. You cannot fight the banshee. You can only prepare for the funeral she is already mourning. However, if the banshee is a ghostly herald, the Japanese gashadokuro is a physical manifestation of collective trauma. Imagine a skeleton 15 times the size of a man wandering the countryside at the darkest hour of the night. It is not born from a single soul, but from the mass graves of soldiers or famine victims who died in bitterness and were never granted a proper burial. Their bones knit together into a singular towering entity of white calcium and rage. The real history behind the gashadokuro is rooted in the bloody Sengoku period of Japan, a time of ceaseless civil war and starvation. When thousands died in fields, their bodies left to rot, the survivors created the myth of the starving skeleton. It was a way to process the sheer scale of the carnage. The only warning you receive is a loud, rhythmic ringing in your ears, the sound of the giant's teeth chattering as it approaches. It doesn't hunt for food. It hunts to add your bones to its own, a literal growing monument to the neglected dead. Whether it's the lonely cry of the Irish spirit or the rattling bones of the Japanese giant, these creatures remind us of a singular, terrifying truth. The past does not always stay buried. Sometimes it gets up and comes looking for us.
We often pride ourselves on being rational moderns. We have mapped the oceans, explored the forests of the north, and decoded the geology behind the Hellenic legends. But fear is a biological constant. If you take away the campfire, the human mind will find a new place to project its nightmares. Today, those nightmares live in the liminal spaces, the empty hallways, the flickering fluorescent lights of a 24-hour gas station, and the grainy footage of a doorbell camera at 3 a.m. Enter the legend of the black-eyed children. Since the late 1990s, accounts have surfaced across the English-speaking world of children, usually aged between 6 and 16, appearing on doorsteps or at car windows. They dress in outdated clothing and speak with a monotone, hypnotic authority. Their request is always the same: "Let us in." The real horror of this modern myth is the physical reaction of the witnesses. They describe an overwhelming, instinctual sense of dread, the prey response. When the children finally look up, their eyes are not human. They are solid, oily black from lid to lid, with no white sclera or iris. They are the ultimate urban predator, using our social conditioning, our desire to help a child in need, against us. They represent the fear of the invader in our most sacred space, the home. But modern terror has also taken a turn toward the cosmic. We see this in the evolution of creatures like Slender Man or the entities of the backrooms. These aren't ghosts of the dead, they are glitches in reality. They represent a fear unique to the 21st century, the fear that our world is a simulation, or that there are folds in space where we can simply slip out of existence. In 2014, the real-world consequences of these digital myths became terrifyingly clear during the Slender Man stabbing in Wisconsin. 2 young girls, influenced by online lore, attempted to commit a sacrifice to a creature that didn't exist until the internet breathed life into it. It proved that a myth doesn't need 1,000 years of history to be dangerous. It only needs to be shared. The modern mythos tells us that as long as there is an unknown, there will be monsters. We no longer fear the Kraken because we have submarines, but we fear the black-eyed kid because we don't know who is standing on the other side of our locked door. The abyss hasn't gone away, it has just moved into the digital static, waiting for us to click, to look, and to wonder, what if?